Hello and welcome to Label Sessions Presents, the podcast where we talk to the most interesting people about all the things you need to know right now if you're driving innovation across the world of business, design, tech, and culture. Today I'm joined by two of our newest label mates, as well as Keishia Quijano, label producer and fellow colleague at Label Sessions. Hello, Keishia.
Hello. Super excited for this conversation.
Awesome, so am I. We'll kick this off for our first new label mate, Albert Thompson. Albert is the marketer's marketer with 25 years experience of shaping how brands show up, scale up, and get back on track with working with heavy hitters like Lexus, Toyota, Unilever, and countless others.
Hello. Happy to be here.
And then there's Marie Meslin, the organizational rebuilder who leads with people first, a systems-minded leader who helps people-led organizations imagine what's possible and then builds the teams, programs, and cultures to make it real.
Fantastic. Great to be here.
Awesome. Hopefully those were flattering enough intros for you guys.
Perfectly vague. I love it.
Because you do so much, I feel,
A jack of all trades and a master of everything by the sounds of it. But I'm sure we'll get in a little bit more about that soon. We'll kick off with our first topic then, and this one is pointed towards a little bit more on the brand side of things. So people often assume that big companies invest in innovation to drive new growth, and that is obviously a big factor. Also, though, boards sign off investment in innovation because they want to manage the risk of being disrupted. They want to reduce the chance that a new entrant can come and start eating into the market share. And in fashion, specifically brand fashion, is the rise of a company called Alo Yoga that's getting attention with an article in the Wall Street Journal. Thinking of them as sort of a credible disruptor to Lululemon. Lululemon is obviously an invited brand of ours. Levi's is doing the same thing. They're trying to stay ahead with a regular stream of product innovation outside of, jeans. And LVMH are looking to AI to stay ahead in the operations of their business. So thinking for, leaders and brands, and specifically fashion, where should you look now if you want to maintain the advantage in that market? But, and I guess this sort of opens to the wider question of, it doesn't have to necessarily be fashion, but should you be scared by what you see new entrants do when someone comes to be a credible disruptor on the market, or should you try and learn from them? And do you think there's certain things that every brand can do to sort of stay ahead? And I think, Albert, if I don't mind picking on you to kick us off.
Sure thing. Look, fashion is the one category that moves at the speed of culture. And I think that is probably what's most daunting about the categories that they're in, is that fashion as a sector moves so fast. It's so fluid. It presents itself in so many factions, so many places for which you could extract something new coming out of a part of Africa. As fast as you could get it you could see it emerging in Baltimore. The question is it going to be a thing? It is a category where history has a notion of repeating itself and teaching itself. So there are certain factors you can look at as to the level of stickiness for which this is going to emerge. The funny thing is, I know both the brands you mentioned well. I bought Alo because I had to get it for my wife for Mother's Day or birthday. So I'm not a consumer, but I've had to consume it. In which you start to find out is that these fast followers have a certain degree of scrappiness that the previous incumbent may have once had, or their business model wasn't built on. So the second mover advantage always comes into play when you start looking at the ability to innovate from a more bottom up type of disruption. So you look at Fabletics, the same thing when they started to come into play and define a niche. What they started to pivot around was women of culture, women of different body types. I think they hit faster than what Lululemon did. Nothing against Lululemon as a juggernaut. But when you're a challenger, you can move at the speed of culture with a certain degree of nimbleness because marketing is a supply chain business. When you start to look at the fact that these large institutions have baked in manufacturing and shipping and distribution, it's not easy just to pivot every single store in your entire supply chain. When you're much smaller, you can make these adaptations literally on the fly, and you can make pivots and corrections, almost like halftime adjustments in a game, very, very fast. So that's the advantage that Alo has being smaller. The question is, if they were bigger than Lululemon, could they make the same adjustments? Maybe if they were a fast fashion sort of outfit like a Zara, who seems to have designs and styles very quickly and put them in stores immediately. But that is a mindset of a company. It's not necessarily baked in. And I think that's the biggest thing about innovation. When I look at a Louis Vuitton, I look at someone who has more top-down marketplace prowess, that they can change the marketplace from the top, less bottom-up disruption. The great thing is you have a creative, innovative mind like a Pharrell at the helm, who's going to mix up tradition with new age materials and colors to speak to a broader spectrum. So by doing that, you've now seeded interest in so many ways. That gives you line of sight into what the populace wants. That's the thing about diversification in the product and mixing for different personas. You get a quicker read against all the personas very quickly. I think the great thing about deploying AI is like line of sight. What can we not see? By deploying these large language models, we can now see and then make adaptations even faster. So I think one is a classic case of the second move advantage is smaller, more nimble, that rocks with a different business mind and ethos to know it has to do that to compete with a Louis Vuitton. And I think from a Louis Vuitton standpoint, it's someone who sits at the top of the dominance hierarchy and is still a major object of desire. They're like, how can we deploy tools to give us advantage that we didn't have before to better understand how things are shape shifting in a world of tariffs and inflation, more haves, sometimes more have nots, as well as more fierce competition from all the other luxury good makers in their sector.
I think it's really interesting on the point that you're making of like different companies and different stages of where they are, what innovation almost means to them. So whether, if it's a big company, it's not necessarily that innovation is kind of the move towards the new. It's almost like something that they use as kind of almost protection from that. Like they're protecting their existing position. That's what they might perhaps have to use it for. Whereas if you're kind of a startup new, perhaps innovation is more freedom to push the boundaries. I don't know. That's kind of what I'm picking up from your saying, but it could be the other way around. I'd love to hear what you think about that.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting. And, Marie could probably definitely add to this. When you identify, create a unique identity mark, the identity mark is how you're going to stand and show up in the marketplace. And I think the problem with a lot of brands is they don't have a unique identity mark. So as they start to plateau or mature out, competition comes, there's no means of distinguishing. People want membership. Okay, that is nature very much about this collectivism, but let's distill it to membership. Like Dallas Cowboys is membership. Okay, that's why they're such fanatics in this country. Philadelphia Eagles fans, Reno's, Bostonians is membership. You either like Boston or you can go. So when those things are very strong pulls, and there's certain brands that really create membership around it, it's very sticky. It's almost as sticky as fear is in the world. And I think that's a very powerful ethos. Some people build a brand around this idea of membership and belonging, and they throttle that into design, into elements. Louis Vuitton is about membership. That's why they talk about the never fill, the monograms, and all these tenants. That's why the stores are laid out the way they are. That's why they hand you a personal shopper and some champagne to sip on while you shop. That's membership. They're setting the frame as to why you want to deal with them. That's a very strong pull. Some brands do that from the very beginning. It's baked in their DNA, and that's their competitive advantage. That's how they outflank competitors. Some try to evolve into it and put appearances on that later. But the ones that set the frame well, the ones that are really tapping into human psychology, why people do things they do, and will stay with them, even in tough times, on certain times or times where there's so many choices. They want to be the clear choice of consideration. And you find as someone who's written business plans for small startups, that's something that I like founders to break into the DNA because they're going to need it, even if they don't understand it. This idea of a transactional nature of marketing is killing marketing because what it is, it's poor brand building. Instead, you want to build membership around the belonging to your brand. So they stay with the evolution of your brand while other brands may drop out or just fall out of favor. When they talk about this notion of our opinions aren't really their own, I believe message and marketing do, then we're wearing in the consumer psychology of what we're trying to normalize, what someone should be doing as soon as they do it, almost in a subconscious manner. And I think that's one of the things that's very powerful if done right. It is that you see other brands miss the mark. And that's why they plateau, or they go out of business, or they just end out at some rural outlet mall, because that's the only place they'll now be consumed. By the way, outlet malls seem to be the kiss of death when you go to that.
I think so. This is something that's triggered a thought for me for this idea that innovation can be reactionary, right? It can be built out of fear, but leadership, culture, anything that happens out of fear is going to fail. Like there is an ethos around how you come to something, how you bring people together and why you do it. And I think if you're being reactionary and if you're afraid that, people are going to eat into your margin, the whole thing is probably going to fall apart, right? You need to come at it from a really creative, excited, there's a movement to be built around innovation to bring people in, right? To kind of get everybody's buy-in. So I think being like mindful around that, which is very difficult when you can see all your margins drop, but there is something to be said around your kind of, the culture you're building around your innovation ecosystem, right? And making sure that you're leading with with creativity. You're leading to do something new. You're leading with that kind of aspiration, which is what startups do, right? They're leading with possibility. They're not leading through fear. So that's one thing. The other thing too is you kind of have to remember we're moving from, between social media and AI, we're moving from a race of engagement to a race of shortcuts, right? And both of those things have some serious downfalls. So the idea that LVMH is, using AI, of course they are. Like everybody is going to be using them. But again, you have to be very mindful around what that's going to mean for the future. And if you're taking, for example, we've already seen an example, right? Which is moving from what Albert was saying, which is like a company like Zara, fast fashion. And then you've got a company like Shein, which is the fastest fashion you can possibly have. What are the differences? What does that mean? And is that something that we want to be moving towards or not? What impact is this actually having on the industry, on the people, on your margins, all of those things. So we do have some examples of what it means to race to shortcuts and what it means to use AI, but that has a real impact on your brand, on how people see it. It's not just about how fast can you get it to market, which is seemingly what everybody is rushing towards. Maybe that's not the right attitude. And companies who have a long-standing kind of a classic luxury, component to it, and I'd love to hear from Albert from that, like, if an LVMH moves so fast, what does that do to its brand? Because there is something about, a legacy of building, a legacy of culture, a legacy of classicism, right? Which is one of the reasons why people, kind of think about the kind of the old school houses and the old school kind of luxury brands. Do they want it to come out as fast with innovation? Is that something people are looking for? I don't know. That's a question I'm hearing about.
It's interesting you say that because I think these long view ideologies are not really being really seriously broken down as the implications of what people are doing. And what you'll find is innovation was somewhat of a flag they were wearing for optics. Everybody wants to appear innovative because nobody wants to appear stagnant. Just the way that no one wants to appear complacent. Everyone wants to feel like be seen as they're somewhat edgy and take risks. That is another currency in terms of the front-facing view of who we are. It's why we have these different personas that play out on different social media platforms, where Facebook is like who you really are. Instagram is who you're projecting to be. It's like all these different faces based on rules of engagement of platforms. But those are the same things that play out effectively in business become very dangerous when they get really operationalized and aren't operationalized with truth. And I think that's the fool's errands of innovation. Is like, you're not really innovative. You're trying to put on the opposite of you are, because innovation creates traction for people to work with you, do business with you. But the truth gets laid to bear at some point when realizing that at the point of execution, these things are just